When two officers detained her, they had no idea they would cross paths with her again. This time, in the courtroom as the judge overseeing their case. It was a bright afternoon in Riverside, California. The park was bustling with the sounds of children laughing, runners jogging along the paths, and families enjoying picnics under the shade of tall oak trees. Amid this lively yet serene scene, an African-American woman sat on a bench by the pond, a thick hardcover book on her lap. Her name was Maya, a respected attorney taking a rare moment to unwind from her demanding schedule. She was deeply engaged in her reading when the sharp screech of tires shattered her concentration. A police cruiser pulled up to the curb, drawing the attention of a few passers-by. Two officers stepped out, their expressions stern and exuding authority. Their eyes immediately fixed on Maya, the only person sitting alone nearby. "Ma'am, may we speak with you for a moment?" one officer called out, his tone more suspicious than concerned. Maya looked up from her book, her demeanor calm and unshaken. "Of course," she replied. Carefully closing her book, the second officer approached with a clipped tone. "We received a report about some suspicious activity in the area. Can you tell us what you're doing here?" Maya raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. "Suspicious activity? I'm just sitting here reading," she responded, holding up her book as if to prove her innocence. But their scrutiny remained unchanged. "Can we see some ID?" the first officer demanded. Maya's pulse quickened, but she stayed composed. "I don't understand why this is necessary. It's routine," she stated. The second officer's tone suggested otherwise, causing the small crowd that had gathered to begin murmuring. Some looked curious, while others exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the imbalance in the interaction. Maya sighed and reached into her bag, pulling out her wallet to hand over her driver's license. One officer took it, scanning the information with unnecessary intensity. "Maya Thompson," he read aloud mockingly. What's your business here, Ms. Thompson?" Maya inhaled deeply, striving to maintain her patience. "I live in this city. I came here to enjoy the park." "Is that a problem?" The officer's lips tightened. "We'll see." He handed her ID back, but instead of leaving, they lingered, asking questions that felt less like routine and more like an interrogation. "Do you always carry a book like that?" one officer sneered. "Are you alone here or waiting for someone?" another added, his hand resting deliberately on his belt. Maya had handled countless tense situations in courtrooms, but this was different. The power dynamic was stark, and their tone carried an edge. She chose her words carefully. "I'm not answering any more questions unless you tell me what I'm being accused of." Her refusal seemed to trigger something in them. The first officer stepped forward. "Don't get smart with us," he snapped. "We're just doing our job." Maya replied with a steady voice, "I'm not breaking the law by sitting in a public park." But reason was not on their agenda. The first officer reached for her arm. "They're resisting," he said, though Maya hadn't moved. "What are you doing?" she exclaimed, startled. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder as a man pulled out his phone to record the scene. "Stop resisting," the officer repeated, louder this time, as if performing for the growing audience. Maya's heart raced as she felt the cold metal of handcuffs snap around her wrists. She tried to stay calm, even as humiliation and frustration burned within her. The officers led her toward their cruiser, ignoring questions from onlookers. Maya turned her head toward the crowd, locking eyes with a young woman holding up her phone. For a moment, there was an unspoken exchange, a silent plea to document the unfolding injustice. But as the car door slammed shut, Maya knew this wasn't the end of the story, it was only the beginning. Inside the cramped back seat of the police cruiser, Maya's mind raced. She had spent years defending clients, standing up for justice, and navigating the legal system. But now she was on the other side. The absurdity of the situation struck her, but there was no humor in it, only anger. The ride to the station was suffocatingly silent, save for the crackle of the police radio. Maya stared out the window, her reflection merging with the passing scenery, her wrists aching from the cuffs digging into her skin. At the station, things only got worse. The booking process was invasive, humiliating, and designed to strip her of her dignity. She was fingerprinted, photographed, and led to a small holding cell with fluorescent lights that buzzed relentlessly. "Enjoy your stay," one of the officers said smugly as he shut the cell door. Maya sat on the cold bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, replaying the events at the park over and over in her mind. How had such a peaceful moment spiraled into this? The answer was as clear as it was bitter: prejudice. Hours passed before anyone acknowledged her again. A young officer approached the cell, holding a clipboard. "Miss Thompson, you've been charged with resisting arrest and obstructing a peace officer," he said flatly. "On what grounds?" Maya asked sharply. Her voice was firmer than she intended. "You can discuss that in court," he replied before turning away. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to think strategically. The charges were flimsy and she knew it, but she also knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. Cases like hers rarely were. Eventually, Maya was released on bail. As she walked out of the station, the cool night air hit her like a wave, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. She spotted her colleague and friend Lisa waiting by the curb. "Maya!" Lisa rushed over, her face a mix of relief and concern. "Are you okay?" Maya nodded, though her body betrayed her with a slight tremor. "I'm fine," she said, though the word felt hollow. As they drove away, Lisa kept glancing at her, waiting for her to speak. Finally, Maya broke the silence. "I'm not letting this slide." "Not this time," Lisa echoed, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "What are you thinking?" Lisa asked. "I'm thinking I'm tired of this happening," Maya replied. "I have the tools, the knowledge, and the resources to fight back, and I will." That night, Maya sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by legal pads and open books. She worked tirelessly, outlining a civil rights lawsuit against the officers in the department. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from a simmering determination. As days turned into weeks, the community began to rally around her. The video of her arrest, shared by the young woman in the park, had gone viral. People from all walks of life reached out with messages of support, sharing their own stories of injustice. Maya's resolve grew stronger with every email, every phone call, every comment. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who had been silenced, humiliated, or dismissed. But even as she prepared for the courtroom battle, she couldn't predict the moment when justice would take an unexpected turn. The weeks following Maya's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions and relentless work. Her law firm was initially hesitant, worried that her public case might overshadow their carefully cultivated reputation, but Maya didn't flinch. She explained calmly but firmly that this fight wasn't just about her, it was about setting a precedent. The viral video had done more than spread her story, it had sparked conversations across the city and beyond. The footage of Maya, calm yet defiant as the officers forcibly led her away, became a symbol of resilience in the face of injustice. Reporters began calling, asking for interviews, but Maya turned them all down. She wasn't interested in media attention. Her focus was laser sharp on building a case that would not only hold the officers accountable, but also expose the systemic flaws that allowed such behavior to persist. At night, when the world went quiet, the weight of the situation crept in. She replayed the arrest in her mind, the dismissive tone, the handcuffs, the murmurs of the crowd. She thought about how easily things could have escalated further, the thought making her stomach churn. But it also fueled her determination. One evening, as she sifted through her research, Lisa stopped by with takeout. Maya barely looked up from her laptop as Lisa placed the food on the table. "You've been at this for hours," Lisa said gently. "I don't have a choice," Maya replied without missing a beat. Lisa sat across from her, studying her face. "You know this is bigger than just a legal battle, right? People are looking to you now." Maya closed her laptop, finally meeting her friend's gaze. "I know," she said, her voice steady. "That's why I can't afford to lose." Her preparation was meticulous. She combed through similar cases, pulling precedents and gathering evidence to dismantle the officers' claims. She enlisted the help of trusted colleagues, building a legal team that shared her passion for justice. But it wasn't just about the courtroom. Maya also made it a point to engage with the community. She attended town halls, listened to others who had experienced similar injustices, and even spoke at a local college about the importance of accountability. One afternoon, while walking to her car after a meeting, a stranger approached her. "Miss Thompson?" the woman asked hesitantly. "Yes," Maya replied. "I just wanted to say thank you," the woman said, her voice cracking, "for standing up to them, for standing up for all of us." Maya felt her throat tighten. She managed a small smile. "I'm just doing what I can." The community's support was a double-edged sword. It empowered her, but also heightened the pressure. She couldn't let them down. Then one day, her attorney called with news. The officers she was suing had filed a motion to dismiss the case. Maya expected as much. It was a standard move to delay the process, but as her attorney explained the next steps, she froze. "You should know something else," he said cautiously. "You've been assigned as the judge for one of their cases next month." The irony was staggering. Maya had spent weeks preparing to fight these officers in court, and now fate had handed her an entirely different kind of justice. For a moment, she wondered if she could do it, if she could sit on that bench and remain impartial. But then she thought about everything they had put her through, about the people depending on her to make a stand. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was an opportunity to show what real justice looked like. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs as people filed in and took their seats. The case was nothing particularly high profile. An internal misconduct hearing involving two officers accused of excessive force in an unrelated incident. At most, it was just another day in the justice system. The two officers, Carter and Daniels, sat at the defendant's table wearing their uniforms like armor. They leaned toward each other, speaking in low tones, their expressions indifferent, almost bored. To them, this was routine. Another hurdle to clear, another case to brush aside. Then the door to the judge's chambers opened, and the room fell silent. Maya stepped onto the bench, her black robe flowing behind her. She moved with purpose, her expression calm yet commanding. As she took her seat, she glanced toward the defendants. The reaction was immediate. Officer Carter's face drained of color, his eyes widening in shock. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening as he struggled to process what he was seeing. It was her, the woman they had humiliated and arrested at the park. Maya allowed a brief pause, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. Then, in a clear, steady voice, she began the proceedings. "This court is now in session. Please be seated." The officers sat stiffly, their composure faltering. Carter whispered something to their lawyer, who nodded but kept his focus on Maya. For the first time in weeks, Maya felt the upper hand, but she knew this wasn't about revenge. Her job as a judge demanded impartiality, and she would uphold that standard. Still, the irony wasn't lost on her, or anyone else in the room, as the attorneys presented their opening arguments. Maya maintained her professionalism, listening intently and taking notes, but every so often her gaze would flicker toward the officers. She could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their hands fidgeted slightly during a recess. Carter and Daniel stepped into the hallway, their voices low but agitated. "How is she the judge?" Carter hissed, his frustration barely contained. "This has to be a setup." Daniels muttered, shaking his head. "It's not a setup," their lawyer interjected. "It's a coincidence, and you need to stay focused." "She's not the enemy here," the lawyer continued. "Your actions are, but the officers weren't listening. They were too consumed by the surreal nature of their predicament." When court resumed, Maya remained composed, ensuring the hearing proceeded fairly and efficiently. Yet her presence alone seemed to unsettle the defendants. Every time she addressed them, they shifted in their seats, their confidence eroding little by little. At one point during witness testimony, Maya caught Carter stealing a glance at her. His expression wasn't defiance. It was something closer to regret, as if he was beginning to understand the gravity of what they had done. By the end of the day, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Maya adjourned the hearing, her gavel striking with finality. Carter and Daniels lingered near the exit, their faces pale and drawn. For the first time, they seemed to grasp the gravity of their actions and the reality of what awaited them. But justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about accountability, change, and ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. A week later, the courtroom was silent as Maya entered to deliver her ruling. Every seat was filled, the tension almost tangible. Reporters lined the back wall, their pens poised to capture every word. This was no longer just a case about two officers. It had become a symbol of a larger fight for justice and accountability. Maya's voice was calm but firm as she began. The role of law enforcement is to protect and serve the community with integrity, respect, and fairness. When those entrusted with this responsibility abuse their power, it erodes public trust and causes harm far beyond the immediate victim. This case has laid bare the consequences of such actions. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. Carter and Daniels sat at the defense table, their heads bowed. The weight of her words was unmistakable. The evidence presented has demonstrated that Officers Carter and Daniels acted with unnecessary force, disregarding the protocols they are sworn to uphold. Their actions were not only unjustified but indicative of a troubling pattern that must be addressed. Maya outlined the consequences: mandatory suspension without pay, participation in extensive retraining programs, and a formal disciplinary record that would follow them. The ruling was firm but fair, striking a balance between accountability and the opportunity for reform. When she finished, Maya closed the case with a decisive gavel. "Strike. This court is adjourned." The officers stood, their expressions somber as they prepared to leave. Before exiting, Carter hesitated and turned to Maya. "Your Honor," he began, his voice barely audible, "I'm sorry. It wasn't enough to undo the harm, but it was a start." Maya nodded, acknowledging his words without offering absolution. True change, she knew, would come through actions, not apologies. As the courtroom emptied, Maya remained seated, taking a moment to reflect. She had seen justice served, but the victory felt bittersweet. For every case like this, countless others went unspoken and unresolved. Later that evening, Maya attended a community meeting at a local recreation center. The room was filled with people eager to share their stories, their frustrations, their hopes. As she listened, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. An older woman approached her after the meeting, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you," she said, gripping Maya's hand tightly. "What you did in that courtroom means the world to us." Maya smiled softly. "This is just the beginning. We have so much more work to do." The following week saw meaningful conversations between community leaders, law enforcement, and local activists. Maya used her platform to advocate for reforms, emphasizing the need for transparency and accountability in policing. The case had sparked a ripple effect not just in Riverside, but across the state. People began demanding change, pushing for policies that prioritized fairness and equality. For Maya, the journey wasn't about personal vindication. It was about ensuring that others wouldn't have to endure what she had. The fight for justice was ongoing, but moments like this reminded her that change, though slow, was possible. As she stood on the steps of the courthouse one afternoon, watching a group of young activists gather for a peaceful rally, she felt a sense of hope. The system wasn't perfect, but with enough voices, it could be pushed toward progress. And that, she thought, is the kind of justice worth fighting for. If you believe in the power of accountability and change, subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire action and reflection. Let's work together to make the world a fairer place.